Okay, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
In a recent transportation hearing, administrator of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Ann Farrow, someone who's worked well with my office, talked about hours of service for commercial trucks. This is sort of a real-life example of what we're talking about. And I want to ask you about the subjective nature, the culture of the bureaucrats and workers who behind these regulations, and the disincentives they may or may not have to not take risks, but rather go to that regulation which offers the most safety for them and perhaps the most expensive for the public. Not unlike Administrator Lisa Jackson's, to paraphrase, cost is not our problem. In certain regulation, we simply do, we're in the business of protecting the environment, which I respect. The Federal Motor Carriers was working on a study. They didn't finish it. They didn't include a study on regulation that impacts specific industries, for example, concrete, cell phone, trucks, asphalt, local deliveries of aggregates. I simply asked the question, or it was asked at the committee hearing, how it made their new regulations credible when they hadn't even finished the study yet and never really got an answer. But I wonder, for example, Dr. Greenstone, you have great ideas in terms of follow-up and analysis of what the real world impact is of some of these things. But do you believe there's a cultural bias of, for lack of a better way for me to explain it, of personal protection and a disincentive to create regulation which is more relevant in the real world as opposed to kind of subjective and value-based, which is more inclusive?
You know, I can't speak to the exact issue
Sure.
that you mentioned about Department of Transportation, but what I do think is that there's not enough sunshine in the regulatory process, and through this kind of look-back mechanism that I think would be a fantastic idea, and through having outside approvals, that would kind of produce the sunshine that would allow for a kind of a healthier examination of some of the trade-offs that you're talking about.
Dr. Dudley, do you believe that there is a bias towards more regulation inside of these organizations as opposed to less? Since the more regulation they create, the less risk comes to bear on their decision.
Well, I think that's true, and I think it's been documented that the incentives are to err on the side of over-regulating, because there are two types of errors you could have, and if you make a mistake and allow action that later turns out not to have been safe, you all are going to haul them up before Congress and they'll be berated. Whereas if you take an action that maybe inhibits some innovation, that's less visible. That's certainly true in the medical area.
How do you address, in the medical area, particularly with the FDA and approval of drugs that can be life-saving but long in the tooth, people are dying while they're waiting for them. How do you change that culture for anybody out there who, any of you four, gentleman and lady, who might have an idea?
I mean,
how do you incentivize people to be creative in the process as opposed to restrictive?
Let me concur with Professor Greenstone that the regulatory process is very insular, and there isn't enough transparency and sunshine, bringing in the wisdom of crowds. And there are a variety of ways of doing it, and it's one of the things that we're thinking about, but getting a lot of different perspectives on a regulation, both after it's in effect, but also before, would, I think, could improve the regulatory process.
I think one of the things Congress could do through oversight is continually ask agencies, and this is whether it's regulation or spending programs or whatever, what is the result of what you did, and what is the evidence that you're actually solving problems and that this is working? And a lot of times in this town we get caught up in the idea that, well, we've solved the problem because we passed a law, we solved the problem because we adopted a regulation. Sort of the fact that the government engaged in activity is taken as proof that the problem's solved.
So they check that box.
Yeah, check the box and whatever, but you know, through vigorous oversight, asking, all right, what, you know, is the problem actually solved? You know, is the air cleaner, is the water cleaner, or whatever particular problem you're trying to deal with?
You know, as an industry right now, our focus is not as much on
wholesale reform of regulation, but it is on making sure that the regulations are applied in a transparent and consistent and a reasonable and predictable manner, and we think that MDUFA is going to help that. You know, a simplistic comment that I could add is you know, the FDA is highly visible for all of the negative decisions that it makes, and they're highly criticized for all the decisions that people think are wrong. I think we could do a better job of celebrating the right decisions that they make when they do make decisions to let new technologies out and to begin helping patients. And I think they deserve as much visibility for those decisions as they do for what we think are the wrong ones.
Thank you, and my time's expired.
Thank you.